Kings, queens, welcome back. It's been a little while since we reviewed one of the Pokemon regions, and I expected it to be a little bit, but not a whole 2 months. You probably forgot I even played Pokemon. But it's fine because this video is going to make up for it. We are finally going over the region that some people considered a soft reset. So of course we'll go over what the Unova region brought to the franchise. However, before we jump into it, if you missed any of the previous regions and love that region, you should probably go check out that video. We've already done Kanto through Sinnoh, and of course the newest Paldea region. So if any of those interest you, go check out the playlist or just wait to the end of the video. And finally, if you enjoy what you see, consider subscribing and checking out the links down below. Alrighty, that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and get started. To not waste your time, I must mention that some people believe that Unova is the best Pokemon region ever. It's hard to believe because there's not too many aspects they brought to the table. Features such as shiny Pokemon, Wi-Fi battles, double battles were all brought by different regions. Therefore, you naturally wonder, what is it about Unova that people care about? To start off with the backstory, Unova is based off of the United States. So most of the people that love this game or even watch my videos are from the United States. So it could just be a bias factor because you relate to it. But without spoiling anything, I can tell you right now, that's cap. We'll specifically be talking about Black and White and also the continuation, which is Black and White 2. Unlike other games we reviewed, there is no definitive edition. Therefore, for those who do not know, there is no Pokemon Gray. You could consider Black 2 and White 2 a definitive edition, but if anything, it's just a continuation of a previous story years ago. However, before we start talking about the story, we have to talk about the thing that you'll see first, the starter Pokemon, or what I like to call them, the failures. Now, there's nothing wrong with the original three. Oshawott, Tepig, and Snivy are fine starters. The problem comes from what GameFreak decided to do with them after they evolved. For both the water and grass starter, we've already had 2 pure typings before, so why would we want a third? Both Samurai and Superior don't stand out because there's nothing special about them. For casuals, they get the same exact ability as every other starter. Their move pool coverage is actually pitiful, plus their stats aren't very great. However, these two are just the base of the problem. The biggest problem comes from Tepig. Tepig evolves into Emboar, which is a bulky Pokemon with higher attack and defense. The problem is, it's a fighting type. GameFreak decided to make a third fighting type right after Blaziken and Infernape, and both of those Pokemon were better anyways. Making a third fire and fighting type and justifying him being bulky as a new Pokemon does not matter. This Pokemon is not different, and these 3 are forgettable. Again, there's nothing wrong with the base forms of these Pokemon, however, the evolutions are just terrible. Before we jump into the pros and cons, there's one more thing that we have to address, and that's the quote-unquote evil team, Team Plasma. Team Plasma is not like the other teams that are here for money, power, fame, or just here to make more land. Instead, they address a real-life problem that's been revolving around Pokemon, and that's to liberate all Pokemon from people. Now, you could have heard about this big bad company named PETA that believes capturing Pokemon is abuse. Whether you believe this fact or not, GameFreak might as well have put them in the game. This might as well be Team PETA. Now, their cause is contradicted because they still use Pokemon to fight. However, one of their leaders named N has addressed it before. In his quote from the game, he mentions that he's willing to have his Pokemon hurt so they can reach their freedom. After the game, you're also able to battle N on a daily basis, which kind of defeats the purpose of what he's doing. Regardless, the overall goal to free Pokemon is different and much better than making more water. Now let's go ahead and talk about the pros of these games. And the first one here, a lot of people love, you can finally reuse TMs. Now, GameFreak should have made this change literally years ago. It was really dumb that in previous generations, some TMs were either single use or you had to buy multiple copies of them. GameFreak should have known as a kid you're going to spam Hyper Beam, therefore give me more. But now the game finally lets you reuse TMs. Therefore, if I get a good move on a Pokemon that I'll probably never use again after this one use, I can easily put that same move on a Pokemon that I like better. Now again, this is a change that made it to later generations. It's just that Pokemon Black and White finally made this change now than later, so of course you're going to give it a plus. However, the next pro on the list as a bigger plus is having a great story. Now, having a great story is subjective. You can like this, you can like that. It may not be exactly the same, but I'm sure we can all recognize when something is just generally not good. In previous Pokemon generations, we've had teams that fight for world domination, teams that just want more land or more water, or the other team that they just But for once, we finally get a team that fights for something meaningful. I mean, you didn't think that Archie and Maxie were necessarily doing something right. And even if you look at characters that are just antagonists, you start to feel bad for them compared to thinking they're just bad in general. The character Silver from Gold and Silver was really just a punk. The dude just got dealt a bad hand and really didn't have much of a purpose. If anything, Silver felt like more of a side protagonist. However, when we look at Black and White, we go look at N and realize he's not a bad guy either. Guesses took him underneath his wing and raised him up. But the dude's always had a good head on his shoulders and he wants to help Pokemon in the end. Now again, this is all subjective. Maybe you think Pokemon should be forced to fight and there is no counter argument. If you do fall in that category, I'm sorry, because this is probably one of the best stories Pokemon could deliver. But the sad part is there's not too many more pros about this game. You see, Pokemon Black and White did bring a couple more aspects to the series, but it wasn't that big. As mentioned before, this game was considered a soft reset, and it also introduced the most new amount of Pokemon to the game. But other than that, most of the stuff from Black and White, they just did better than the previous games. Now let's go ahead and jump into the con. Now, to be completely honest, I traveled across the land and I searched so far and so wide, and I just couldn't find any. At least nothing that should dampen your enjoyment of these games. Now, if you have a dying problem about this game, let me know in the comments down below. But the biggest thing people complained about were the triple and rotation battles. Now, these types of battles have only been around for Generation 5 and 6, and good thing they died here. Rotation battles were awful because you always had one Pokemon that could get hit. You had to predict and adjust to what Pokemon you have forward and what your opponent will have. Now, while Pokemon is a guessing game, this is the ultimate guessing game. Rotation battles were really unfun. It ended up being single battles that you can just see the next Pokemon coming around eventually. The worst part is it basically gave you a free switch with an attack. Rotation battles were a bad idea, move on. Next, you have triple battles, and they were a bit too chaotic. For those of you who have ever played or watched people in the VGCs, you've probably seen people play in the double format. If you have any background knowledge about the doubles format, you know it's pretty difficult. Most Pokemon have to run protect because you're usually in danger of 2 attacks. Well, guess what? Triple battling is that, but with another Pokemon. At some point, it just got too chaotic. Luckily, GameFreak also thought that this was a failure and never brought it back. But again, besides these formats, what else can you really complain about? Pokemon Black and White did basically everything the previous games did before and improved on it. Now, of course, the obvious is not here, such as having double regions. But thus far, for a Pokemon game, this is one of the best. Now, before we go over the actual rating, let me summarize the goods and bads. The good news is this game does what you expect a Pokemon game to do. Pretty good story behind the game, as well as a lot of new Pokemon. Pokemon Black and White, as well as Pokemon Black and White 2, do not reimagine the Pokemon formula. On the other hand, there's very little bad things about the game. Bad battle mechanics were added within this game, however, in future installments, they were removed out. And then finally, you have Emboar. So, if you do have memories about this game or want to go back and play it, there's nothing about these games that will make you say, wow. And therefore, that's why I'm giving Pokemon Black and White and Black and White 2 a 9 out of 10. The Unova region is good and could be Pokemon Generation 1 if we didn't already have one. But overall, you get your max enjoyment out of a Pokemon game here. So overall, let me know what you think about the Unova region. On top of that, don't forget the next region getting a remake is Unova. So in the future, maybe we'll do an update to this video. But until then, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And go check out my Pokemon playlist over here. I'm sure there's something inside this list you have not seen. I love y'all. Take care. Peace.